Welcome to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you burn fat, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
Hey guys, it's Debbie, and I just wanted to give you a quick little message from one of our sponsors, Element. It's spelled L-M-N-T, but pronounced Element. If you haven't heard about this, Element is a tasty electrolyte drink mix with everything you need and nothing you don't. That means there's a lot of salt with no sugar, and it's formulated to help anyone with their electrolyte needs and is perfectly suited for those doing a keto, low carb, or paleo diet. And I think this is great for athletes, especially in the summertime and when you're training in warmer climates. Element contains a science-backed electrolyte ratio of 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. None of the junk, no sugar, no coloring, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers. That's it. I like the unsweetened one because the other flavors do have a little stevia, but stevia doesn't do well in my body. So I prefer the unsweetened Element, and I like the packets because I can throw them in my bike bag when I go on a long bike ride or when traveling, and I can just dump a packet in my water, and it keeps me so much more hydrated. Because remember, we don't sweat out water, we sweat out minerals. So check it out. You've got a nice little gift from them if you use our discount code Drink Element. I'll put the link in the show notes. But using the code Low Carb Athlete, you get a free gift with purchase. You get a free Element sample pack with any order when you order with Low Carb Athlete on our special URL code. So support the podcast, support Element. It's backed by science, and we love what they're doing. So try it out. Hello, everybody. It's Debbie, and I'm back again to talk to a new guest on the show that you may have heard of his name or heard his voice as a co-host on another podcast. His name is Dr. J. Wiles, and I wanted to have Dr. J on the show because he is an expert in heart rate variability, and I love diving into biometrics and my Oura Ring or clients with the Whoop Band and really looking at their heart rate variability scores and their readiness and their low frequency and high frequency and their resting heart rate, and all this information we can collect to really personalize a coaching program for athletes, as I say, to be fit and healthy as well as happy. And Dr. J, he co-hosts Ben Greenfield's Q&A podcast. So you might have heard of him on Ben's podcast because they've done a few episodes on strictly heart rate variability that Dr. J did some solo podcasts for Ben. And they have lots of information because Dr. J will talk to him about Hanu health. Now, we all have our own stories, our own whys and purpose, that we are following our passion and we're on a mission. And Dr. J, as most practitioners and coaches in this space, has his own story. So he's a clinical health psychologist. He developed a love for health psychology during his time in graduate school while he experienced his own health issues. See, this is where everyone has their purpose, that they're following their purpose. He found a purpose. He started his own professional career, and then he started to suffer from brain fog, fatigue, and a variety of other symptoms. He later discovered he had exposure to toxic mold, which I found that I did as well in my fitness studio. We always had yoga studio above my fitness studio and had leaks through the ceiling. And I realized the ceiling tiles were always stained from water damage. And then I thought back, shower in our house when we moved in had water damage. So you have to look at toxic mold exposure and learn about that. I did a couple episodes on that last year with Ryan Monahan, but toxic mold is huge. And Jay had always had an interest in health. So when he came across health psychology and psychophysiology, he knew he wanted his attention between the connection of the mind and the body. As I said, I've been fascinated by heart rate variability since, I did Ben Greenfield's Superhuman Coach program 2010, somewhere back then. And then we had the one and only Superhuman conference, and we talked to Rhonda Collier was there speaking about Sweet Beat Life, and Ben was doing an app with them, and I started doing a beta testing program for Sweet Beat Life, measuring my heart rate variability in 2013 once I got my adrenal exhaustion, and started testing it every day, and really found that information, that biofeedback, fascinating to figure out, am I doing all the right things to heal and rebuild my body at a cellular level? So Dr. J is going to talk to us today about what is heart rate variability and what is important parts of it to understand. What are common misconceptions about HRV, and if it's low, which we want higher, so low isn't ideal, higher is better in HRVs readings, and then the connection between the human stress response and what we can do to improve it. And they have a new app that I've been working on testing myself called Hanu, and seeing how that can help us with monitoring our recovery and repair from our workouts, but also stressors, because I know a lot of you are like me, that, well, my old me, that I would be just burning the candle at both ends, starting the day super early at 4:30 in the morning and not getting home until 7:30 at night, and just going nonstop all day. And I think a lot of people that are athletes, that have family, that have kids, they are all trying to fit in too much in the day. And so a lot of the exercise we do might not be ideal, and we need to maybe tweak things and adjust when we feel this sense of chronic stress overload. And measuring heart rate variability, I found over the years, is really beneficial to know, all right, am I doing everything I can do to recover? Simple breathing exercises is what the Hanu health app is going to help you use it and guide you through like 5 minutes of breathing exercises, and see how that can right away strengthen your HRV. So I love to look at HRV, how blood glucose impacts it, food sensitivities, sleep, stress, daily life stress, but those hidden internal stressors. What if your HRV is chronically low? It could be an indication, a clue towards internal hidden stressors that are impacting your body as a whole. So looking at parasites, gut dysbiosis, inflammation in your body. So these chronic stressors, external, internal, accumulate and overload the nervous system. And you'll see that, I think, in your HRV scores. Hydration, longevity are other elements to see, okay, what's contributing to my low or high or optimal HRV for me. So it's really fascinating, I think, to dive into looking at energy balance, to find the right energy balance to improve performance and health and longevity. So looking at that. And then also, I've been trying to, as I keep talking about, my female athletes map and ebook I've been working on, and it should be out now on my website, debbiepotts.net, how females, our heart rate variability towards the end of your cycle, the luteal phase, will be lower. So you'll be more sympathetic dominant than finding the optimal resilient range between parasympathetic and sympathetic, that you can see that in your HRV, as well as your resting heart rate will be higher too in the luteal phase. So really tracking, as with my Aura ring, I can see the changes of, like, my resting heart rate's 40, but then the week before my cycle begins, or to the end of my cycle, my resting heart rate will be higher. My heart rate variability will be dropping. Now it's back up to 120 to 140, depending on the day. So really tracking all of your metrics for a female athlete that's premenopausal is really fascinating. So you can start to learn what's going on with your body and your hormones, and not freak out like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? My HRV just dropped to 70 and it's usually 120. So figuring out what is your normal and what's changing based on life, stressors, nutrition, and your hormone cycle. So let's talk to Dr. J. If you go to the show notes on the website, you'll get all the links and the timestamps. And if you are interested in learning more about Hanu Health, we have our discount code that I try to be consistent with called the Low Carb Athlete, that you can get a discount on the Hanu Health app and heart rate monitor that comes with it. So check it out. All right, let's bring on Dr. J. All right, I finally have Dr. J. Wiles on my show to talk about how heart rate variability can help you as an endurance athlete burn fat for fat loss goals, those are performance goals. And of course, we all should have longevity goals. Improving the aging process should be ideally the first goal. So thanks for coming on the show. We're going to talk about HRV and Hanu Health and how we can really kind of biohack ourselves, getting this feedback on how to adjust and course correct. And as I've shared over the years on the podcast for 10 years, chronic stress impacts everything. And I'm firsthand the one to share my journey. My book, Life is Not a Race, since 2013, really had the impact of my health from chronic stress. So I love to dive into the science, and you are just filled with knowledge, and everyone's probably heard you on Ben Greenfield's podcast as his co-host, and you have all your own show and information. So thanks for coming on to share your knowledge with our listeners.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So what is the purpose of Hanu Health? Now I call it Hanu. I know it's a Hawaiian word because I call turtle because I go to Kona all the time. So I think Hanu is turtle. Hanu is your business name. Hanu, what does that mean?
It's actually Hanu. So
Hanu.
Yeah, it's pronounced Hanu, which is Hawaiian for breath.
But what does turtle mean though? Turtle's Hanu, I thought.
I don't know. Maybe they're intermixed. It could be. I will be the first to say that I'm not proficient in the Hawaiian language. So the reason, as you know, I know you're in North County, San Diego, and that's where we're centered out of. And so our CEO, Chris, when we were putting together kind of our brains on what we should name this company, as any startup does, I feel like the default is just, let's go to other languages and see if we can find a word that's a part of our mission statement. And then we'll see if we can find one that's sexy or sounds good. And we're like, oh, Hawaiian. That makes sense, for us, a North San Diego County company. Yeah. And then, we're not too far from Hawaii, surf culture and everything. And a lot of the centerpiece, I should say, of our app is focused around functional breathing and resonance breathing. I was like, okay, the Hawaiian word there, at least we came across. And then we did fact check this one, that it is indeed Hanu and pronounced Hanu, but maybe Hanu is turtle. And maybe we could be Hanu, the breathing turtle. And that actually is kind of cool. We just,
and turtle's slow and relaxed, right? So that made me go with why we need to stimulate more parasympathetic. Because we're so sympathetic dominant. So
hey,
I'll find
full
out.
Circle.
Yeah,
there we go.
I know. I'm going to ask my Hawaiian friends that because I was just texting with them this morning. So I'll have to ask. Okay.
Yeah, no,
so
in fact, check us because we don't want to go walking around saying that we pronounce it
turtle.
One way. Yeah, we're the turtle company. Why not? Spirit animal. I love it.
Yeah. So anyways, what is the Hanu Health and what's your why to create a company? Because we all know that's adds to chronic stress is doing more and doing, a business and a podcast and research and everything that you do. So talk about a little bit about the company and your why and why you're doing this.
Yeah, so my background in my discipline is in clinical psychology. So I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. So I should probably also note that I'm one of the co-founders. There's three of us for Hanu. I'm one of the co-founders. I'm also the chief scientific officer. So my background, obviously, as I mentioned, as a psychologist, is more in the research domain, but also as a clinician and a practitioner. And so for me, I've always had this drive and this mission and purpose to help people who are battling significant mental health issues, something that really derails their overall health. It's not just mental, but also how it interacts physically with us. So my specialization is actually in the field of health psychology and psychophysiology, which really looks at the interconnection between mental and physical health. And we know that it's just this bi-directional two-way street, and they communicate to one another. They are one in the same. So I like to be kind of a huge advocate for that. And so for me, and for those who are at Hanu, a part of our mission is to really spread kind of mental health care to the masses in a way that is truly differentiated differential and doesn't just focus on the cognitive part of mental health, which is very vitally important, but also focus on changes in physiology. Because we know that a lot of people, especially if they're battling with mental health related issues, whether it's chronic significant stress, anxiety, depression, PTSD, and so forth, a lot of times the default in mental health care is to go to a psychotherapist, to a counselor, psychologist. And these are great avenues. I would never want to take away from the importance of those avenues. But the one thing to keep in mind is that many individuals who go to see a therapist, they start in the cognitive domain, and many individuals are not ready to go into the cognitive domain. And so the one big problem that we have as therapists, as counselors, as psychologists, is just a big churn rate or a high attrition. A lot of people drop out after one session, two sessions, or maybe they don't even make it past the intake because it's very difficult for them to approach mental health care with cognition first. So kind of our goal or our mission is to train people how to become more self-aware of how our physiology can actually be this manifestation of significant stress, how it can be a manifestation of other different types of mental health related issues. So we train better self-awareness of that, the cause agents, how it manifests from a biometric perspective, how it manifests in other ways as well. And then the kicker for us is that we want to teach evidence-based, scientifically founded therapeutic approaches for self-regulation. So if we had to kind of boil Hanu down into two terms, it's all about self-awareness of the stress response and self-regulation of the stress response.
Yeah, because you have to know, what I would say as a health investigator is more like looking at the why, what's going on to cause these imbalances, and simple things that we can do to create that, improve our foundations and work on just lifestyle habits in general, because we have these external stressors all the time and then hidden internal chronic sources of stress that we identify with lab testing. But how do we test and identify those external stressors without measuring your heart rate variability? And I find that so important to do. Is I've shared, 10 years ago, 2013, I said I started doing my HRV testing all the time to really help figure out, okay, what is causing my health issues and how can I deal with that? The other side of it, as you're saying, people with depression, and I think, our athletes are listening, endurance athletes, a lot of athletes have anxiety and depression and issues, which is why I think they turn to exercise, any addictions that they might have. Like, because I've said years and years ago, I said, what are you running from? What are you racing from? Like, what's your why? Because a lot of people, I think, choose athletics because they're trying to deal with stress, but it's more like, okay, let's still uncover, let's, go a little deeper, figure out what's causing that stressor. And heart rate variability, I find from my own experience, from my own health, but coaching other people, it's just something, I have Aura Ring and using your program to identify what's my trigger. And then how important breathing goes with that to improve that. So we always say, test and not guess. We don't know what we don't know. But how, what is heart rate variability in your view? And then how we can get into improving that, because I find there's so many variables. So let's just kind of go a brief 101, because we've had so many podcasts in the past I can link to.
Yeah. So the one thing I would say is I always like to simplify heart rate variability into the 30,000 foot view, because it's one that I think people can understand. And I don't want to add too much to the complexity of heart rate variability, because it is a very complex biometric. Heart rate variability is not a singular number. A lot of people think of it that way because they see it on their Aura Ring or whatever device that they're using that captures that one data point. They think of it that way, when heart rate variability is actually a very multifaceted and complex system of biometrics. But if we had to kind of just do the 30,000 foot view, like basic conceptualization of heart rate variability, it is the single greatest non-invasive proxy or biometric that we have for assessing shifts or the dynamic changes in the nervous system. And to be put even more simply than that, is that heart rate variability gives us insight. It gives us a window into our stress response, and it is able to pick up and detect changes in our stress response. And this comes from, again, changes changes or dynamic shifts in our autonomic nervous system, which is really kind of the main control center that then leads up to our primary control center. It's the main control center, I should say, of our peripheral nervous system, but it sends the direct signal up to our central nervous system that is informing the brain and the spinal cord of what's occurring in the body and how well we are either adapting or not adapting to our environment or to the stressors that are in front of us. So that's the more like simplistic view of it, but I can break it open as much as you'd like.
Well, I'll link the podcast you did on Ben Greenfield's show, because that was like a whole 1 hour plus in depth. I think you did 2 of them too. That it just really, you did a great job of, and there's great show notes you can go back and read over, because I think that really helps kind of figure it out. But I think, what is heart rate variability, to test it, and the difference with the Oura Ring to wearing the heart rate chest strap, like I'm using the polar strap that goes with the app. So let's kind of go into that. What are we measuring to find out our heart rate variability, for short, HRV? And then I would love to dive into the LF and HF, which is low frequency and high frequency, and how we can look at really the parasympathetic versus the sympathetic nervous system.
Sure. So the one thing to keep in mind is that when we think about heart rate variability, we're actually talking about the time differences or the variance in time that occurs in between what we call adjacent heartbeats. So if you think about what heart rate is, so if someone were to say you have a heart rate of 60 beats per minute, we use that because it equates to very, very simple math, then you would think, okay, that means that every 1 second in a course of a minute, my heart was beating. So that means that there was likely, or no, on average, there was 1 second in between each heartbeat. Well, if that were the case and your heartbeat at 60 beats per minute and there was 1 second even in between each successive heartbeat, well, that actually would equate to a heart rate variability of 0. So that it would not be a good thing. And the reason being is because the heart does not operate like a metronome. It has to adjust dynamically to trillions of processes at any given moment. And when you have the capability, or I should say the ability to adapt, when your nervous system has the ability to adapt to these processes or handle incoming and outcoming information, well, then heart rate variability goes up. One of the main sources of heart rate variability, there are 2 primary sources. There are many more than that, but 2 primary. One would be a phenomenon called respiratory sinus arrhythmia that occurs, and this is the changes of heart rate across the respiratory cycle. So as we inhale, heart rate will go up, and as we exhale, heart rate goes down. And the reason that this happens is because upon inhalation, physiology changes, lungs expand, it causes the chest cavity to fill up and the heart to actually shrink in size, so it's not able to expand, so it beats a lot faster because it doesn't have as much room to contract. So that's one thing that happens. But the other thing that happens from a physiological perspective is when you inhale, well, now oxygen is ready to be delivered all throughout the body, to the brain, to the lungs, to the heart, to every muscular tissue that needs it to mobilize energy. Oxygen's ready to go. So heart rate's going to speed up in order to deliver. But upon exhalation, heart rate significantly slows down, especially in comparison to inhalation. And that's because we have activation of our 10th cranial nerve, or our vagus nerve, which causes a cascade of different neurotransmitter secretion. It also causes changes from the neural network perspective. We have physiological changes also within the chest cavity and within the lungs, and heart rate will significantly decrease. So that change across the respiratory cycle equates to increased variability, because the time differences between heartbeats is going to change substantially. And with change, because it's, again, the heart's not a metronome, we see changes in heart rate variability. But when you encounter a stressor, when something either in your environment, it could be, that could occur that causes more of an internal response, or maybe you're exerting a lot of energy, as we also call this exercise, that this can actually cause the heart rate to start to stabilize, because it's experiencing a stressor. Heart rate is going up. It's time to mobilize energy and utilize energy reserves. And so therefore, in order to adapt or maintain homeostasis, the heart rate starts to regulate, because it says this is kind of the self-protection that that you can have right now, because you're experiencing those stressors. So I thought I'd throw the physiology down there so that people understood. But then I want to speak now to the question that you asked, which is when we look at kind of the differences between how we intake data and what that data is telling us, there's a couple of things that we have to keep in mind. One would be kind of the context of when we're taking it, where we're taking it, and why we're taking it. And because there's a significant difference between, like, let's say Aura and Whoop and Apple Watch and some other devices that are capturing HRV, and Garmin. Yeah, I got my Garmin on as well. I've got everything. I've got my Whoop, I've got my Aura, I've got Garmin. Up. And Hanu's on my chest. So
yeah, I do too. I've got 3.
I love it. Yeah, I feel like a bit of a cyborg or something. But I love data, and it's so much fun. But the thing that Aura and all these other devices are doing, and these are predominantly what we call PPG devices, or photoplasmography devices, which just is a complex way of saying that instead of using kind of the direct signal, like an EKG of getting the electrical output of the heart, we're using an indirect signal, which is looking at changes in capillary density in order to pick up heart rate. And we use that through light. Well, the one thing that's unfortunate about light-based devices like Aura, like Whoop, is that they are very prone to what's called artifact. So if there's any light infraction, if there's movement, it's really hard to get extremely pinpoint accurate data. The cool thing is that technology is so good right now that in order to capture your heart rate, it's pretty dang accurate. Like it stays pretty stable. But heart rate variability, it's really bad. Like you lose all fidelity. So that's why with Hanu, which we're a different type of device, and I'll talk about it here in a second, we utilize EKG. So we're getting the direct output from the heart. You can wear it in under all conditions, and almost under every single condition, we're going to be able to give you accurate, not just heart rate, but accurate heart rate variability, which is really different. So these other devices are going to capture it because they're so prone to artifact and they're not going to capture it throughout the day. They're really going to be made to be either taken overnight or maybe once in the morning when you wake up. And these are going to serve as really great proxies for recovery. So what do I mean when I say recovery? We're talking about how well has the nervous system repaired? How well has it recovered since your last, let's say, exertion of energy? How well has it recovered from sleep? How well has it recovered from the previous day's psychological stressors that you encountered? Again, HRV serves as a proxy. It's a data point for looking at changes or shifts. And the idea behind that is that it can drive certain things, like can tell us whether or not we're overreaching or overtraining. It can also tell us if psychological stress is being impactful. If you start to see a downward trend day after day after day, well, that's telling us something about our nervous system and our state. It looks like taxation on the nervous system is occurring. Is it because we're overreaching or overtraining? Is it because, like, it's a Monday, but on Friday, I have a huge keynote speech that I have to give in front of 500 people, and nervous system is starting to really feel it, and it doesn't have the ability, or at least it's not repairing in the way we'd like it to. It gives us all that information. Where Hanu is a little bit different, and again, like, I don't want to make this one where I'm like just plugging Hanu, but it's just different in the sense that it's looking at HRV shifts all throughout the day so that you can become more aware throughout your day, especially your working day. We say it's kind of really great throughout the working day when you have some levels of constants for most people, is that we can start to pinpoint what are those things that are really causing some taxation of the nervous system, especially from a psychological perspective. Because a lot of times when I'm sitting here wearing the device, and either I'm doing emails or I'm caught up in other work, I can almost always, when I have these significant drops in HRV, pinpoint them to something, and I will log them as a life event in the app. And I can say, oh man, over the course of the last week, I can really see the things that are taxing my nervous system. I can really see when they're taxing my nervous system. All of these things are extremely important because, again, back to the mission of what Hanu is here for, all about self-awareness. Like, what are those things that maybe I wasn't aware of that are really taking a knock at my nervous system? And then always to self-awareness without self-regulation is essentially useless, because who cares if we know what's causing us stress if we don't do something about it? So I tell people the real therapy here, or the real growth edge here, is when we engage in self-regulation. And that's where, for me, it's an absolute must to really come back to, okay, I know what's going on, but now how can I do something about it?
And that's funny, because I always say to people, you collect all this data, and all these people, have all these gadgets nowadays, that it's like, are you doing anything with that information? Because it's like they get it reported and maybe they put it all into Heads Up Health or they're training peak metrics. And it's like, all right, well, are you course correcting and changing things up today because of that information? So I think
it's like, it's one thing to like, well, it's one thing, right, to like look at your Oura ring and it tell you slept like absolute crap. It's like, okay, that's great. I'm glad that you told me that my sleep architecture wasn't good. But it's like if you have that every single night, you're not doing anything. I'm like, why do you have the Oura ring? Like it's just being kind of like this negative health coach for you because all it's telling you is that you're doing bad things.
Yeah, you're crap.
But you got to make exactly. You got to make the conscientious effort and decision to do something different. And that's actually too where we're differing as well at Hanu is that we don't want to just tell people things are off, but we want to provide them with a pathway and say we have specialized, tailored, curated, white glove approach to helping you resolve some of these issues that you have. And we know that when we give people that insight and we give people that direction, then that's going to lead to better outcomes. Because a lot of people, they kind of like throw their hands up and they're like, my HRV is crap. I don't know what to do. Like I feel awful. And it's like, well, maybe you just need a little bit better direction. So we're going to provide you good insight and direction based on your data so that we can bring it back full circle. You can do something about it and then data improve. And then more so than anything, your overall sense of well-being and recovery and whatever your goals are, those things improve, or at least you approach them a lot closer than when you started.
Well, that's what I think is beneficial to people like me that are a health coach, health and fitness coach, and working on their nutritional therapy and monitoring their intake of, or their biometrics and their food intake and glucose and all that, because people are coming to me like, I'm getting all this information and I'm so confused. What do I do with it all? Yes. And I think that's where it does help to invest in your health. And, if you're going to spend all that money on doing all these, getting all these gadgets, that you actually have someone to guide you through it for a few months to get you started, figure out, let's use this information as clues to help create a personalized program for you, the individual.
Right.
Based on your goals. Because I think a lot of people don't really know how to use it, or maybe they do, but they just need someone to go, hey, you know what? I've seen this pattern. We need to stop, pause, and reset.
Yes, for sure. So, for sure.
Let's kind of dive into the app. And then I want to look at, tie this in with fat loss, nutrition, food, glucose, kind of insulin resistance, and then performance recovery. And then anything with longevity that we miss. So with the app, there's so much information on here. And so I'm wearing the heart rate strap and I did speed workout last night in hot weather. So it was good. And then kind of walk us through briefly what people do from this and how the exercises, what sets us apart. And I know I listened to your call with Ben, but there's I think the difference is this section on training. Relax, calm, the breathing exercises, sleep, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4 things, and then routine. So like insomnia, when someone, wakes up or can't fall asleep, I think this is different. So I'll stop talking and let you explain that.
Yeah. So one of the key differentiators, I'll kind of start on the home screen here. So, I've got my home screen up too. I'm in dark mode. For the home screen, there's a couple of things that you're getting. We're actually reworking a lot of this. So this could be antiquated by the time, some people listen to the podcast, but that's okay. And that's what you get with the early adoption of tech.
You get all this info. But
and that's the My Data screen. So the home screen is really going to have two things that are going on. You're going to see modulating continuous heart rate variability and modulating continuous heart rate. You'll also see a score that is a composite aggregate score called the stress resiliency score. It's the top number that you see with that bar graph. That's it. Yeah, exactly. What that graph is actually telling us right now is, and it modulates in real time. So if anybody has utilized Oura or Whoop, you get like one score and that's it for the day, right? Like you wake up and then here's your readiness score, or here's your like activity score or whatever it may be. Like you get it once in the day. Whereas we wanted to take the approach, because things are so incredibly fluid when it comes to our nervous system, we wanted to take the approach of creating an algorithm and a score that really aggregates a lot of different data points. So what that score is it's looking at 3 different components. It's looking at heart rate variability and how that compares to your baseline. And I'll get into that here in just a second. It's looking at heart rate and how that compares to your baseline. And then it's looking at respiration rate, or how quickly you're breathing, and it's comparing that to your baseline. So all 3 of those things. When things appear to be shifted in the direction of your nervous system being taxed, we might call that either more sympathetic output or a removal of parasympathetic output. What you'll see that reflected reflected in is you'll see that score modulate in a downward direction. But as you train, as you are in more of a relaxed state, you'll see that number go in an upward direction. So it really modulates not on quote unquote how psychologically stressed you are, but it's looking at metrics related to how taxed is your nervous system right now and how resilient does that make you to stress. Mm-hmm. So, and that's one thing that I like to point out is that that score is not intended to say like, this is how stressed you are. In a way it kind of is, but I think a better way of looking at it is like, how taxed is your nervous system right now? And taxation of the nervous system or stress in and of itself, we have to remember is not a bad thing. It's inherently actually a good thing. Stress is a warning sign, and it's also something that can help us in the immediate future. The problem isn't stress. Like stress, again, is a great thing for us. We have to have stress, otherwise, like we're not going to evolve and continue to procreate and have just new life form that is going to pass down our gene pool. What we need to have happen, though, what we not need to have happen would be these chronic micro stressors that we experience all throughout a day. It's kind of like the whole notion of like death by 1,000 cuts, right? It's like the just continuous small little things throughout our day. We might kind of refer to trauma as like big T, little t trauma. It's like the little tiny T traumas that can get you throughout the day. And I don't mean to bastardize that word trauma because I'm not trying to undermine kind of big T trauma, but we all experience these little things. And someone cuts you off in the middle of a commute. You get a scathing email. You write a scathing email. Yeah. You get in a little tiff with your significant other. If you're someone like me and you've got two little boys, like your two little boys piss you off. so like these things happen, right? And it's like the buildup of these things all day long that chip away at your nervous system. So one thing, Debbie, that I always talk about, I love making this, I made this connection probably, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months ago. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this actually is quite fitting. Very similar, I would kind of mention all the, biometrics I have on me. I have my, CGM.
Oh yeah.
CGM as well. And the reason I show my levels CGM, and it doesn't have to be levels, it can be any CGM, is that heart rate variability has a lot of overlap in terms of how we interpret it, very similar to glucose, which is very interesting. And we can talk about the correlation.
Yeah, for sure. That was on my list.
Yeah, but what I'm talking about in this instance is that we want to keep our heart rate variability fairly stable. Now, if we kind of have an increase because we're in a more relaxed state, we're doing a breath work or a biofeedback practice, that's great, but it's kind of the major spikes in a downward direction, the dips, the low dips over and over and over that are not as a result of physiological exertion. Like if we're walking, if we're engaging in movement, then it's okay to experience those dips. It's more the dips that are a result of these kind of like small influxes of neurochemicals and things that are associated with psychological stress. Those are the ones that tend to be the most impactful, and they compound and compound and compound, and it causes problems. So that stress resiliency score is really there to kind of give you better insight or awareness into kind of how your nervous system is responding at any given moment. So again, it's on 3 things: heart rate variability, heart rate, and then respiration rate. The thing that key differentiates us, and the thing that we're working into our app, and you'll experience soon when we provide better updates, is that you're going to find out what is your baseline range. And remember, in HRV world, normal is better. Not high, not low, normal is better, wherever your baseline is. Now, does that mean that your normal can never change and your thermostat can never change? No, like if we want to attempt to raise HRV, not for the sake of raising HRV, because I think that's a little bit of maybe a myth or a misnomer that we need to just raise HRV. We need to raise HRV because we're building more resilient and more fortified bodies and minds. Like that's the goal. HRV is just a data point. Like if we want to raise HRV, the goal shouldn't be let's raise HRV. The goal should be what can I do to build psychological and physiological fortitude and resilience. And the great side effect of that is that we see a baseline increase in HRV. Absolutely. And so what we do is a couple things. When we find out your baseline, and it gets better with time. So the more and more you wear the device, the more and more we're going to have a shorter and shorter box to identify like what the true window is for you. So when you start off wearing it, your baseline range might be a little bit larger, and it will, shrink and shrink and shrink over time. When we see you falling out of that zone, that's when we push an alert to the user and say, something's a little bit off. Like, what's going on right now? And you have 2 things that you can do. Number one, log the event. We call this a life event. It's just a drop down box, and you can say, whatever's going on. I was in the middle of my commute and someone pulled out in front of me, or, I had email apnea because I was holding my breath during a tense email, whatever it may be, you can log it. And then also you can log your subjective experience, because we want to know that. That's equally as important to objective data. It's like, well, what was your experience like? Because your data may say, oh man, this really like ramped up my nervous system. But you may say, it was mild. Like it wasn't that bad. And maybe it didn't last that long. Or maybe too, your nervous system went ramped up as if you were having a sympathetic response. But maybe during that time, you were getting a raise from your boss that was kind of like a big time thing for you. So you were excited. You were pumped up. And while it looked like it was stress on you, yes, your body was responding because you were mobilizing all that energy with excitement, but really it was a great subjective experience for you. So we don't want to like, quote unquote, penalize you for that. But then afterwards, and again, that's all the self-awareness piece, which is very important. But after that, we provide you with the opportunity to train and all the things that you mentioned. You can train through different types of relaxation strategies, which are like our kind of go-to bread and butter. We call it resonance breathing. I guess the science calls it resonance breathing, and I can explain what that means here. We can do things like help with sleep, and really down-regulating the nervous system to help people who have significant sleep troubles with falling asleep, staying asleep, maybe significant levels of insomnia. We use different biofeedback strategies for that. We have strategies for increasing parasympathetic output prior to meals. So we know that if you are in a state of sympathetic overdrive prior to a meal, like your ability to digest food is going to be really downregulated and almost even non-existent. So we put in a lot of stuff, at least initially too, and we're going to be adding more and more and more over the course of time. But we wanted to put in practices that were really, really important to people, and ones that we thought were very congruent with what the science says is important to people, which is down-regulating the nervous system and learning better to control the autonomic nervous system. Sleep is another really, really big one. Yeah. And then stuff for, prior to your kind of daily routine. So pre-meal, post-meal, in the morning, in the evening, those are all ones that we find just incredibly valuable and important for regulating.
So that's like on the breathing exercises you can do before you're eating. And that's really to help shift you to that parasympathetic nervous system rest and digest that you need to be in. Because I'm always working on that with clients, that before you eat, I think I learned this from Ben years ago, but stop, pause, and take 3 deep breaths in and out. And you're like, and just reset. And it's amazing. Just doing that 3 breaths, you feel like, and it's incredibly valuable. It's amazing. And I think so many people have digestion issues. Everybody I work with, like you said about heart rate variability, it's how you eat, when you eat, why, and what. And the why is so important, but how? And I think a lot of people are eating, even if it's healthy, paleo, keto, whatever you want to call it, nutrient dense whole foods. If you're not digesting your food, we've got an issue. There's going to be downstream issues, problems. 100%.
Yeah. The best thing I ever heard about this. So one of our advisors, Dr. Stephen Cabral, great individual, he brought up this idea, and I never thought about it this way. And now since he brought it up and put it in my mind, I use it all the time. When we think about and I think most people know, and I knew at least, that when we are experiencing a stress response and we're having kind of like this immense flood of glucocorticoids and norepinephrine, epinephrine, when all of this is occurring, like it causes deleterious impact on the body. It shuts down digestion. But the reason that can be so problematic is that when we're intaking food, but we're not digesting appropriately, all that food is sitting in the GI tract, which allows it ample time to ferment. And when all of that food ferments in a way that it should not be, then it can cause extreme or significant dysbiosis, which is kind of that overrunning bad bacteria in the gut. And the problem, though, is that people stay in like this perpetual state of chronic stress. And so when everything shuts down and they're like, I don't understand what's going on, and they try everything, it's like the probiotics, the prebiotics, like they change their complete nutritional profile. And it's not to take away and say that those are bad things. Those are really incredible and valuable things. But if they don't look at the impact of stress and how eating under certain conditions, which in the standard American life is like, how can I scarf as much food down as quickly as possible while working and like commuting and doing all these other things. And so it's like, yes, it's the quality and quantity of the food, but it's also the state that you're eating in that is extremely important. So we say like the whole idea here is that we have to prime the pump. Like if we know that we're going into this in an absolute like stressed out state, then the only way that we can prime the pump here is to and it doesn't take that long. And this is the beauty of the data, Debbie, is that it doesn't take really long at all for you to make a significant physiological shift in through breathing. And so with our application, for me, it's generally like I'll do like a minute to 2 minutes prior to eating. And I'll see that when I do, even within the first 30 seconds, I'll have a significant increase in heart rate variability, significant decrease in heart rate. And for me, I just feel subjectively better and more relaxed. And then we've been doing this as a family. So my wife and I, and then our 2 boys, just take a little bit of time just to focus on the breathing. And
it's just 1 minute too.
That's it. Yeah. And you can set it to however long you want to do it. But one minute is a great place to start, right? Because I think most people are like, yeah, I can put 60 seconds worth of time into my health right now just to prime the pump, engage the parasympathetic output, and reduce kind of the significant risks that occur with eating under a sympathetic or stressed out state.
Mm-hmm. So I know I can say this because they don't listen to my podcast, but I have a family member that had a colonoscopy today and then was doing a GI test too. And they're not telling me, of course, the why, but I know he's my assumption is sympathetic dominant because he has chronic stress in his work life. And I think so much of it, you go see traditional doctors, he's taking his anti-acid pills, which we got in an argument about. I said some things. I'm like, that's not looking at the why. And I think so many people are put on anti-acid pills with their doctor. Sorry, I got yard guy downstairs, but the anti-acid pills and trying to do that, not realize, okay, let's look at heart rate variability. Let's look at, are you stuck in sympathetic when you're struggling to get parasympathetic when you eat. So you're shutting off the digestive processes, causing all this downstream problems. But if you do something like a 1 or 2 minute, or maybe longer after you get used to it, breathing exercises, have you found that helps people with digestion issues to really strengthen their resiliency, getting out of sympathetic when they eat?
Yes, absolutely. Hang on just a second. Like I might have frozen up. Can you still hear me?
Yep.
Okay, there we go. Yeah. So, 100%. We've seen this so many times in just individuals who, especially so one of the things that I say too, is that while it's helpful to do these kind of more short-term approaches, like in the moment, I think that what is the most powerful, or what I would argue is the most powerful, I think the science would argue is the most powerful, is not just doing it like that's my only time that I do it, but conditioning the nervous system really to be in a perpetual state that reflexes to that. So what I mean by that is that if you are, like I always tell people, like, don't try to just condition your response to a certain event or to a certain situation, but really the goal here is to do it outside of that, allow for it to translate into that situation kind of at some point. It's good to be able to practice breathwork techniques, like if you're experiencing immediate stressor, but it's even more important to practice it when you're not in that state, because we're really wanting to condition it as a reflex to be able to use it at any time or any given moment at will. And we call that, again, autonomic control. So that's my at least pitch for people if they're struggling kind of with overall stress and anxiety and like a lack of resilience when things kind of get in the way, maybe a lot of emotional dysregulation. We'll talk about that component because I know you want to talk about longevity. That is like the key to longevity. I'll get back to it in just a second. But I tell people, like, yeah, it's great to practice in the moment. You should do it. It's highly helpful. But really the thing that we should look at is more of a holistic approach of how can we downregulate the nervous system really at will at any time. That's a great example, but at any time. So yeah, that's my go-to. We have seen people significantly improve overall digestive issues with just downregulating the nervous system and training better control.
And a lot of the breathing exercises, you find the kind of box breathing, the inhale 4, pause, exhale, pause. Is that the most effective go-to for people to start with when they're working on doing this, when they're driving, before they eat, before they sleep, when they wake up middle of the night? Is there like number one way to like top method to work on the breathing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that certain people respond differently. I mean, there are certain people who subjectively and objectively respond to box breathing extremely well, and it's their go-to. And it's like, man, if I'm having struggles, like it's really easy for me to remember, and so I just go to it, and that's great. But there's some people who like subjectively and objectively don't respond to box breathing super well, and for them, maybe resonance breathing is a little bit more appropriate, and it's a little bit easier for them to engage their parasympathetic side of their nervous system by doing that type of breathing. If people are wondering what is resonance breathing, that was a term that was coined by Dr. Paul Lair. He's one of our scientific advisors in our company. He's one of the most highly published scientific I should say researchers and psychologists in the entire world in HRV and HRV biofeedback. He's a Rutgers professor emeritus, so very highly regarded individual. And back about 20 or so, might be 30 years now, he coined the term resonance breathing because what he's talking about is cardiac resonance. So what that actually means is that the nervous system is responding in a way to the breathing that is resonating. So it's kind of like this good one-to-one phase relationship. So as you inhale, heart rate goes up. As you exhale, heart rate goes down. You follow this really nice pace of breathing, and that certain rate, a resonance rate, amplifies heart rate variability significantly. And he found that everyone has a resonance rate in between 6.5 breaths per minute, all the way down to as low as 4.5 breaths per minute. And we include in our app the ability for you to find that rate, utilizing his method that has been published about in hundreds, if not thousands of studies. So it's under the assessments, you'll see resonance frequency assessment.
There.
Yeah, it's a 12-minute assessment that finds that optimal breathing rate for you. And then when you find that optimal breathing rate, it populates and you can breathe at it by using the resonance breathing training that's found under the exercises or the training screen. So a lot of people will adapt really well to that. There's a lot of people too who adapt really well to breathing that uses breath holds, and some that don't use breath holds. We just say like practice and train, and don't just try it once. Like a lot of people are like, well, I tried box breathing once, it wasn't effective, didn't like it. I mean, it's like that's like I tried to go run once, and I was like, it didn't really work for me. I was kind of struggling when I was doing that. It's like, of course you were. Like, it takes repetition, it takes practice. Like, we can really create a response that becomes reflexive the more that we practice. I mean, that's what conditioning 101 is in psychology, right? Is that you train something so much, it becomes so habitual and it becomes conditioned that like it's like a reflex. Like when I experience certain things that I know have previously or even still currently caused me stress, like my body is conditioned to begin to respond in a breathing pattern using this appropriate biomechanics and cadence to deal with it. And a lot of the times I look back and say, yeah, I got through that pretty easily compared to what I used to, because I've just conditioned my body and my brain to respond to that event or that stressor in a way that gets me out of it pretty quickly because I have control over my nervous system during that time. So that's really the thing, is just to try and to play around and to experience just all of the practices and not just overly rely on one, maybe out of the gate, just to find like what's best for me, what can I use? And maybe it's something different in different situations. It could be box breathing when you're on your commute. It could be resonance breathing when you're writing emails. Like it could be whatever you choose or you find is the most effective strategy for you. It's the beauty of marrying the objective and subjective data.
Yeah, and I think that's important to teach people how simple it is too. It's like that 3 breaths or the 1 minute exercise. Like, okay, you have 1 minute, you can handle that versus like, I have to start meditation. I have to do 30 minutes. It's like, no, I'm not going to do it at all then. So, realizing that you can have an effective result, good outcome with a 1 minute breath work. Yeah. But if we can, I know I'm going to run out of time, so I'll have to add in a finish to our conversation. I'll record frequently asked questions after this, but with the glucose and food sensitivities and insulin, how do you pick up some clues on this program to figure out, are we eating foods that we are reactive to? Because I know heart rate and HRV will adjust. And then a different topic I'll dive into maybe later, but the female and with the hormone changes too, I find interesting, different topic, but let's just focus on the fat loss part with the glucose, insulin, food sensitivities, how this can help us.
Yeah. It's a great question because I think that it sometimes gets a little bit overlooked. And I would say that, there's been so much incredible research on, just overall cell metabolism and fat loss and food sensitivities and looking at other types of blood biomarkers that are out there, that a lot of times looking at autonomic nervous system shift biomarkers hasn't been at the forefront of a lot of researchers' minds, but it has been. Maybe just not as much as some of the other avenues that I just mentioned. So when we think about what happens when we eat, so we've already come to the conclusion that it's really good to eat in a parasympathetically driven state. So we increase heart rate variability, decrease heart rate prior to a meal to help and aid in the digestion state. But then one of the things that I think that people just need to remember is that when we eat, we are inevitably going to see, regardless of whether or not you're in a sympathetic or parasympathetic state while eating, we're going to see biometric shifts. So what happens when you put food into your mouth and you allow it to go down your esophagus and into your gut? Well, you have to start some level of energy mobilization because it takes a lot of work to do that task. It takes a lot of work for you to actually talk. I mean, if you think about what it takes to talk, we see that when people are talking, heart rate goes up, heart rate variability goes down because we're mobilizing energy. The sympathetic response is all about energy mobilization. So when we think about the stress response, taxation on the nervous system, and then how well are we mobilizing? I won't even say how well, but are we mobilizing energy? So when you put food in your mouth, heart rate is going to go up, HRV is going to go down. But you expect to see this shift and change in biometrics. And what I mean by this is that while heart rate variability will go down, while heart rate will go up, we want to watch out for a couple of things that could be potentially indicative of your body not responding so well to that food or responding well, or how much of an inflammatory response is being elicited in any given moment. The one thing that you want to look at is how much of a drop in HRV. Are we talking about, oh no, we're just kind of staying within your baseline, or maybe we dip a little bit out of your baseline, but it's not much? Or are we talking about, oh man, my baseline's 50, I ate this food, and now like my baseline, now my HRV is like a 7 or an 8. So like it dropped almost like I was doing exercise. And I'm not speaking in hyperbole. We've seen this happen in plenty of individuals who are eating foods that are highly contested with their bodies. And then heart rate, the same thing. Like we expect heart rate to go up. That is not an abnormal thing. That is a part of you're mobilizing energy. That should happen. But though, are we seeing it go up from like, let's say your resting heart rate is 65? Is it going up to 75? Or is it going up to like 90 or 95? Okay, the body's not handling this super well. So that's one key component. The next key component, though, would be duration. So when these biometrics change, how long are they changing for? If they're changing for, let's say, 20 to 30 minutes, that's normal. That's what you'll see. Like after postprandial, after a meal, like you'll see that as well. It responds a lot quicker and repairs a lot quicker than, let's say, if you're measuring something like blood glucose, which typically takes anywhere from an hour, hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours to hit kind of like its pinnacle. HRVs are very different in that it works very fast, and then it responds very fast, but also it recovers a lot faster, or it should. Now, if it doesn't and it stays in this kind of depressed state for a long period of time, let's say longer than 30 minutes, it's going an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. Well, now we know that whatever you just put in your body is not responding well. I'll give the example to you. My diet tends to be, for all intents and purposes, pretty dang clean. However, if I find that I eat something, let's say, that's a little more processed than what I'm used to, especially if it has refined, highly processed oils, especially high linoleic acid, my body responds to it as if like I just like ate a whole fireball. Like like my body goes nuts. HRV plummets and it stays down for a long period of time. If I eat something that's very high in fat and sugar, so let's say something that's really highly processed and not very good for the body, responds the exact same way. And I can see it. Like, it's funny because I will look at blood glucose and it responds exactly how you would think it should. Boom, spike, not very good. Like, it stays up for way longer than what I wanted to when I eat some of the naughty foods. And heart rate variability does the same thing. Like, it's kind of coincides. And you see this really interesting one-to-one relationship. So I have used in the past, and a lot of functional medicine practitioners who I've coached and worked with, we've used heart rate variability as a great proxy if someone doesn't have access to a CGM, or if they're just looking also too, not just at the effects of what happens to blood glucose, but they want to know just like what happens to the nervous system. HRV is a really excellent proxy for that. So I'd say if somebody wants to test a food sensitivity, again, don't do it just one time. You should experiment a couple of times. Partake in that food that you think you might be sensitive to, or that you're testing out. Maybe let's say you're trying to reintegrate something back into the diet. Watch your metrics on Hanu. Watch and see what happens to heart rate variability after you eat it within the first 30 minutes, and then watch what happens afterwards. Look at how that compares to other foods that you've eaten that you have no known allergy for, and see, like, is my body responding? Is my nervous system responding differently? The thing that we could get down to, again, if we get down to the core of why this would be even important in the first place, is because the more and the longer your nervous system is taxed, the more intense and the longer too you have complete dysregulation and dysfunction of other aspects of your physiology. And your physiology is taxed because of this immense amount of cortisol that's being released, the immense amount of sugar that will then be released out of cells because of cortisol, and then the intensive output of insulin. So we see that this comes kind of full circle, especially like when we relate it to glucose, is that stress has the same exact, if not more robust response than you throwing in some, really ultra processed sugar into the body. Glucose and metabolism will act the same. And so a lot of people will say, like, the bad 1-2 combo of fat metabolism, or let's say a suppression of good fat metabolism, would be when someone has an immense amount of stress they're experiencing physiologically or psychologically, and then you combine that with extremely poor nutrition. Like, that's the recipe for disaster. And I would be and the science is kind of clear on this as well, though. It's not kind of clear, it's very clear. That it's like that combination of really poor eating and food, combined with us experiencing all of this unattended stress in our lives, like, this is what is caused the mass epidemic of really poor health outcomes and obesity and metabolic dysfunction and dysregulation, cardiovascular disease. Like, it all kind of points back to these things being dysregulated. And there's other components to health, obviously, like really poor sleep, sedentary lifestyle, or lack of exercise. Those obviously filter in, but I think that the two ones that people can just make changes today on would be assessing the damage that's occurring from an autonomic nervous system standpoint, and then doing something to mitigate the stress component and the nutrition component at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be out of time in the last couple of minutes, but I think that reminds me, my dad just sadly passed away in June a couple months ago, and just thinking how beneficial this would be for people in the hospital. My dad was in the hospital for 2 weeks, and I swear all the medications, all the blood draws they did every day, and then all the stuff they kept giving him, and, to calm him down, the Vicodin at night, and just all this stuff, because he was in sympathetic drive. You're just stimulated, and they just, I don't know. It's just amazing how many people, when they're in a hospital, what happens to your body and all the stress that's happening all the time, that how you can actually help heal someone, but, get these other measurements, it would be amazing, but never probably ever. I can never say never, but I will say never.
Never say never, but I mean, you hope so. But you're right. I mean, you think about how stressful the situation is, and being in a hospital, somewhere that's not home, under like all crazy fluorescent lights, like with it's just like all of these things combined add stress onto our physiology, onto our psychological well-being. You combine that with like not great nutrition normally within the hospital setting, which is so bizarre to me. Like, of all places, you have poor nutrition. And then most people who are in the hospital, whether it is because they don't have the capability or like because it's not built into their routine or schedule, are lying in a bed, not moving, not doing anything. It's just like the combination of everything doesn't appear, at least, to be conducive for really helping people to rebuild back strength and to heal. And it's unfortunate. And so I'm sorry to hear about the loss of your father. But yeah, I hope that there are changes within our medical system and our healthcare system that can really take into consideration those factors and those variables and make some real change.
But that's why I say, train yourself now for your races and events this year, next year, but train your future self. How do you want to visualize yourself 20, 30 years from you? Like Benjamin Hardy has 30 days to your future self program that I love to give to people. It's like, just figure out what are you going to do for yourself now that will set yourself up in the later life to be thriving every day and not struggling to survive the day. And I think all these simple things, and that's why I love heart rate variability testing, because it's affordable to everybody. Not many people can afford like the 5 lab tests that we'll suggest for people to start, doing a Dutch test, organic acids, a Cyrex panel, a GI test that costs a couple $1,000s, and not everyone can afford that, but you can afford a heart rate strap and the app and do this program, because it is something you can use throughout the day and help your sleep, and just kind of one thing that will help you, as we said, about glucose and food sensitivities and insulin, signs of insulin resistance, perhaps. And then I'll add on a recording after this for those listening audio, but on performance for your recovery as an athlete. Like I did, as I said, speed workout last night, and this morning, walked on the beach and did a forward backward running on the beach this morning, Torrey Pines, that I listen to my body and make those adjustments based on my heart rate variability. But how this is so different score than my Garmin or my Oura ring, and how this is a little bit more, beat to beat ongoing, as you said, the heart rhythm versus something that's just infrared light. So kind of trust the more accurate with the heart rate strap and get used to, wearing that. But how long do people wear, do you put a chest strap on all day? Do you wear it nonstop? Like, what's your goal with this?
So you're asking me, who's like the big data nerd, also the co-founder of the company. So I'm going to be like, I'm not the power user. I'm like the elite power user for Hanu, which is, I'm an early morning riser. So I'm normally up around 5.
Are you a lion chronotype?
Oh my goodness, I forgot the chronotype. Yeah, I am a lion. Lion's the early morning.
Lion or a bear?
Super.
I'm a lion.
Yeah, I'm the lion. And so for me, I always throw it on generally first thing, because I want to test it in the morning just to see like how well did I recover from sleep. So I look at my Oura, look at my Whoop, but the thing is that the Oura and Whoop are looking at it all throughout the course of the night, which there's nothing necessarily inherently wrong, but we always have to kind of ask ourselves the question does it matter like the changes that occurred throughout the course of the night, or does it matter like how well we are when we're done with sleep? Because sleep is intended as kind of that, it's there for us to recover. It's there for us to rejuvenate. So for me, I'm actually most in consideration, not of like how things average out overnight. That's interesting for me. I like to watch kind of the trends just for pure data sake, but I'm more interested in like, okay, I just got done recovering. So what is it right now? Like, what is it and I'm very consistent about it every single time, the same condition, same place. But then I keep it on and I wear mine from like 5 in the morning until like 7 at night. So, that's what, 14 hours.
What time do you go to
bed? Generally 9. So around 9 o'clock. So I'm a pretty, I wake up early, but I go to bed early. We put our kids down.
That's not early. I go to bed at 8.
No, that's good. No, that's really good.
But I don't have kids.
Yeah, I spend some time, like for me right now, I really kind of just down regulate the nervous system through doing all the things that I mentioned, all the breath work, but I just love getting into a good book like right before I go to bed. And so sometimes I'll start a book at 8 and I just kind of keep going because I'm so like just into it. So 9 is my general go to bed time. Yeah.
True. So how can people learn more on the app and the program Hanu Health?
Hanu. There you go. Han Solo. So yeah, just go on over to Hanu Health, HANU, hanuhealth.com, and you can pre-order there. So I tell everybody the device is $300 for the first year, and basically that gives you the device for free and then access as a member to the application for 12 months. However, we're running a 40% off discount right now for all the pre-orders because we're not in the market yet. We're coming to market here in right at a month, which is crazy. But I don't remember, Debbie, if we've given you like an affiliate coupon code, but if we don't,
I'll put it in the finish. I'll add on some things that we missed and share with people. They can get it, but there's heart rate down. Yeah, awesome. I think it's just great information because if you are focused on how you can reach your peak performance gains as you get older, and I think to improving the aging process, this is just something and a great tool. There's so many options out there, but number one thing to do, because not everyone's going to afford a NutriSense or Levels every month. And this is something I think is something that will tie in all those different options you have for biohacking, biometric device, but really to give you so much information. And if you're working with a coach, we can really help you figure out how to use all this data to figure out your nutrition, exercise, recovery, and sleep and mobility throughout the day.
So one thing I'll mention too, and you might be interested in this, Debbie, we should talk offline after this, is that if somebody wants kind of like that white glove curated, tailored approach, is that we are actually offering a certification program to health coaches and learning how to use our system. So it's called the Hanu Certified Coach, and it's really kind of an intensive 7-week course live with me for like 14 hours of education and training on all things nervous system functioning and the use of Hanu and working with different case settings and with different protocols. So the Hanu Health Coach, if you are a coach, be very interested to contact us. We have that coming here very soon. But also too, if you're a client and you want a coach, we're going to have kind of like a list of those who've gone through our certification and like have that specialization in heart rate variability and training and Hanu system. Yeah.
Well, good time to wrap it up because the gardener guy that just blows everything around is now here right by my glass house. So I'll wrap it up. Yeah, it's time to wrap it up. I got the blower blowing everything. That's the problem with the eucalyptus trees. You might love the way they look, but they throw bark and leaves like every minute. It's such a mess out here. So anyways, you guys can learn more. I'm going to follow up with a little more information and Q&A, and then we'll bring you more information on the social media, Low Carb Athlete, and YouTube video. We'll have everything on there as well. But I will keep sharing my progress and experimentation with my heart rate variability testing and doing my breathing exercises. Because I know I'm prone to like driving a car if someone's slow in front of you and different things with nutrition and how we, especially eating lunch at say 2:00 middle of the work day, and we like want to eat and get back to work. That we're like, okay, we just ate in 10 minutes. So I think this is a great little tool to have. So thank you so much for your time today. And we'll put the links in the show notes for your podcast with Ben, that you did some solo ones and all the information. You've got tons of resources for people to learn more. So I appreciate your following your passion, purpose, and on your mission. Oops.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's been a blast.
Thanks for listening to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at debbiepotts.net. You can help us to continue to grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.